You probably know the cars with the giant rear wings, the Dodge Charger, Daytona, the Plymouth Superbird, the ones that sell for over $1 million now. But before any of that, there was a plain-looking Charger that almost nobody talks about. No wing, no pointed nose. Just a smoothed-out grille and a new piece of back glass built to drag Dodge back to the front of NASCAR. Only about 392 were ever made. A Hemi one can bring over $300,000 today, and every wing car that came after owes it everything. It was 1968, and the Dodge Charger was one of the best-looking cars in America. This new version had that long Coke bottle body, the hidden headlights, the strong curve down the side. It looked fast, standing still. People loved it, and they bought it. Dodge moved more than 96,000 of them that year. So you would think Dodge had a winner on its hands at the racetrack too. And on the short tracks, it was fine. The trouble started when the car got out onto the big super speedways, where the speeds climbed past 180 miles per hour, and the air stopped being a small thing and started being the whole story. The problem was the look, the exact same look everybody loved. That deeply sunken grille, the one that gave the front end its mean hollow-eyed stare, worked like a scoop. At speed, it caught air and packed it under the nose, and that lifted the front wheels right when the driver needed them holding the road. At 180 miles per hour, the front end was pulling upward with something like 1,200 pounds of lift. The front of the car was trying to fly. Then there was the roof. The Charger had those smooth sail panels running back from the cabin, with the rear window tucked down into a dip between them. Designers call it a flying buttress roofline. It looks great, but when it came to the air, it was a disaster. The sunken window made a pocket of churning, rough air across the back of the car. The air coming off the back was rough enough that it could even pull loose debris right out of the first few rows of the grandstands, or so the story went. True or not, the back of the car was dragging an invisible anchor, a beautiful body that fought the driver at every corner. So, yeah, not great. And Ford knew it. Ford had spent that season running its slippery fastback Torino and the Mercury Cyclone, cars shaped like they actually wanted to cut through the wind. The results were not close. Ford took 27 of the 49 races that year. David Pearson won 16 of them and the championship. And Dodge limped home with 5 wins and a lost carmaker title. For a company that had brought back the Hemi engine just to win the Daytona 500, that was a black eye. The men at the top noticed. Chrysler president Lynn Townsend and Dodge boss Robert McCurry, a man whose nickname was Captain Crunch, made it clear they wanted the problem fixed. Not made better, fixed. So the engineers went looking for speed. And here's the part that still gets me. They did not start with the engine. The Hemi was already plenty. They started with the air. There were really only 2 big changes, and both of them were about letting the wind slide by instead of fighting it. The first change was up front. They took out that scooping, sunken grille and replaced it with a flush-mounted grille and open headlights taken straight off the 1968 Dodge Coronet. Now the nose was smooth and flat, with nothing for the air to pile up against. There is a small detail here that tells you how quickly this was done. They left the old vacuum-powered headlight door setup sitting behind the new open lights, doing nothing at all. You would think somebody might have pulled it out. Nobody did. They had bigger problems. The second change was the roof, and it was the clever one. They filled in that sunken rear window with a flush piece of glass that sat almost in line with the sail panels, dropping the angle of the back window from around 45 degrees down to about 22. Suddenly, the air coming off the roof had a clean ramp to follow all the way to the tail, instead of tumbling into a pocket. They had to shorten the trunk lid to make it work, which made an already small trunk close to useless, and the roughly fitted roof plug tended to leak when it rained. Race cars do not care about leaks. The handful of street buyers probably did. Now, you would expect changes this big to completely change the car. The honest truth is they helped, but not as much as you would hope. In the real world, all that work bought somewhere around 3 to 7 miles per hour on the superspeedways. That sounds tiny. At Daytona, with a Ford breathing on your bumper, it was the difference between leading and finishing second. Hold that thought, because it comes back. There was one more roadblock, and it had nothing to do with the engineering. It was a rule. NASCAR did not let you race a special one-of-a-kind body. To make a body legal, The rulebook said the carmaker had to build and sell a set number of them to the real public. The magic number was 500. Build 500, sell 500, and your wind-cheating tricks become a real production car the people who run NASCAR have to allow. That rule, by the way, is exactly where the name came from. The Charger 500. Dodge did not want to build these on its own assembly line, so it farmed the job out to a Detroit company called Creative Industries. The job was almost funny how simple it was. Dodge sent over finished Charger RT models, and Creative Industries cut off the front clip, bolted on the flush coronet grille, pulled the rear glass, and fitted the new flush window. In went the swap, out came a Charger 500. Here is where the Mopar fans who know their stuff start arguing, and they are right to. Nobody is completely sure how many were actually built. The number you will see most often today is 392. Other counts run closer to 550. The likely reason it fell short is that while these were being made, the engineers had already moved on to something far wilder, and the focus and the cars started flowing toward that instead. If you have to pick one number, 392 is the one to trust. Under the hood, the standard engine was the 440 Magnum, making 375 horsepower. The big option was the 426 Street Hemi, 425 horsepower on paper and almost surely more in real life. You could get a Torque Flight automatic or a 4-speed manual. Of those roughly 392 cars, only about 67 left the line with the Hemi, and that is why a Hemi Charger 500 with the right paperwork is one of the rarest factory Mopars of the time. The Hemi option alone cost around $650 on a car that started near $3,500. You read that right. The engine was almost a fifth of the price of the car. And here is a detail people miss. Not a single one of those street cars ever turned a real race lap. They were built only to meet the rule. The race teams just took the cars they already had and bolted on the new parts that were now allowed. The whole batch was a paperwork job wearing sheet metal. If you enjoy this kind of forgotten history, subscribing is the one thing that helps more of it find the people who really care about it. That is the only ask. Now, back to the track. By the time the green flag dropped on the Daytona 500 in February of 1969, the Charger 500 was finally legal, finally on the grid, and carrying every hope Dodge had put on it. Buddy Baker put a Dodge on the pole, and for most of the afternoon, it looked like the plan had worked. Charlie Glotzbach, driving the number 6 Charger 500 for Cotton Owens, ran up front all day. At one point, his lead grew to something like 11 seconds, which on a superspeedway might as well be a different zip code. The race was his. The aero fix had done its job. Dodge was about to win the biggest race in stock car racing with the car built to do exactly that. Then the air ran out. Coming to the end, Leroy Yarbrough, in a Ford set up by Junior Johnson, reeled Glotzbach back in. Not slowly. He hunted him down over the final laps, slipped past about a mile from the finish, and beat the Dodge to the line by roughly a single car length. It was the first Daytona 500 in history decided on the last lap. For the fans, it was the greatest finish the race had ever seen. For Dodge, it was a gut punch with the whole world watching. They had fixed the car. They had built the 500. They had led almost the whole race, and a Ford still drove around them when it counted. That single car length told the whole story of the season. The Charger 500 was good. It was just not good enough, because Ford had not been standing still. While Dodge was smoothing out its grille, Ford was building the Torino Talladega with a stretched, drooping nose and re-rolled rocker panels that let it sit a full inch lower to the ground. Mercury had its matching Cyclone spoiler too. These cars were even slicker than the Charger 500, and on the high banks that small edge was everything. Now, the Charger 500 was not a total loss. Far from it. Bobby Isaac, driving the number 71 for owner Nord Krauskopf with the famous Harry Hyde calling the shots, had a monster year. He racked up a stack of poles, somewhere around 19 or 20, which set a NASCAR single-season record at the time, and he won a pile of races. The catch, and it is a big one, is where he won them. Almost all of it came on the short tracks, some of them still dirt, where horsepower and handling mattered more than slipping through the air. On the superspeedways, the places this car was built on purpose to win on, the Charger 500 did not win a single race all year. When the season ended, Ford had 26 wins, Mercury had 4, Dodge had 22, and Plymouth had 2. Pearson took another title in a Ford, and Richard Petty, the most famous name in the sport, had walked away from Chrysler that year to drive a Ford himself, because that is where the speed was. When Richard Petty leaves, you have a problem. So Dodge had spent a fortune, gotten the engineering right, and still lost the war. They celebrated Isaac's poles. They should not have gotten comfortable, because the big tracks were still Ford country. Which brings us to the part where Dodge stopped being sensible. The bosses gave the race engineers a blank check and a simple order. Build a car that wins, and do not worry about what it looks like. So they took the Charger 500, the car they had just spent all this work on, and used it as the starting point for something that looked like it had escaped from a science fiction movie. They bolted an 18-inch pointed sheet metal cone onto the nose, with the headlights hidden underneath and a spoiler beneath that. Then, at the back, they put a rear wing on 2 tall posts, standing nearly 2 feet in the air. The whole thing had been shaped in a real wind tunnel using small models, because guessing was no longer good enough. And here is the key part. That wild new car kept the Charger 500's flush rear window. The fix that had failed to win on its own became the base the wing was built on. The Charger Daytona came straight out of the car that came up short. And the Daytona did what the 500 could not. When the new track at Talladega opened in September of 1969, Charlie Glotzbach put a Daytona around it at a record on a closed track of 199.466 miles per hour. The following spring, Buddy Baker took a Daytona to that same track and became the first man to officially run a stock car over 200 miles per hour on a closed track with a best lap of 200.447. The plain Charger 500 had clawed for 3 to 7 miles per hour. The winged car it created blew straight past the magic number. Plymouth wanted in, so for 1970 they built their own version, the Superbird, with its own nose cone and an even taller wing. And it worked as a way to win drivers too, because that car is what finally pulled Richard Petty back home to Chrysler. The wing cars won so completely that NASCAR more or less wrote rules to wipe them out, shrinking their big engines down for 1971 until there was no point in running them. They were too good. They were gone almost as fast as they arrived. And the Charger 500, the car that started the whole chain reaction, mostly got forgotten. Look at where it sits today. The wing cars are royalty. A Daytona or a Superbird with the right paperwork is $1 million car. The Charger 500 that made both of them possible sells for a small piece of that. A clean 440 car runs around $100,000. The rare Hemi cars climb a lot higher, with proven cars selling in the range of $137,000 to $231,000, and the very best low-mile Hemi cars pushing past $341,000, all the way up to $357,500 for the most expensive one ever sold. That sounds like a lot of money until you remember what its winged children bring. Only 12 or 13 Charger 500s are thought to still exist with full paperwork, which works out to about 3% of all the ones built. The 500 and the Daytona together barely add up to 900 cars. These are not just rare, they are nearly extinct, and the plainer one is the one people overlook. It is overlooked for good reasons. It has no wing to point at. It has no nose cone to take a picture of. It never won the big race it was built to win. And it was replaced inside the same model year by something far flashier. By every test that makes a car famous, the Charger 500 lost. But go back to the start. Every one of those $1 million wing cars, the ones everybody knows, the ones in every poster and every museum, is sitting on top of two ideas that came from this car. The flush nose, the flush glass. Dodge needed the failure first. There was no shortcut to the wing without the smoothed-out Charger that came up one car length short at Daytona. The forgotten car is the reason the famous ones exist. If you want to see what happened when Dodge stopped playing it safe and went all in on that wing, the full story of the Charger Daytona is waiting on screen right now. It is the car this one made possible. Go watch it.